Good afternoon, everyone. I'm John Brennan with Continuity Insights, and I'd like to welcome you to today's webinar, Cyber Resilience, What Business Continuity Managers Can and Must Do, which will be presented by Stephen Ross, founder and executive principal of Risk Masters International, and moderated by Eric Beck, co-founder and principal of Risk Masters International. Before we get started, I'd like to review a few quick items with you. First, throughout today's presentation, you will have the opportunity to submit questions by typing into the questions pane of your control panel. You may send in your questions at any time during the presentation, and we will address those throughout the broadcast and during the Q&A portion of our program. And I also want to let everybody know that today's webinar will also be recorded for later on-demand viewing, and as a registered participant, you will receive a link to this recording. We've got a lot of information to cover today, so let's get started. So please join me in welcome Eric Beck and Stephen Ross.
Thanks, Don. I appreciate it. And good afternoon and good morning to everybody on the West Coast. My name is Eric Beck. I'm a principal with Risk Masters International. I'll be serving as your moderator today. As Don said, our webinar topic for today is cyber resilience, what business continuity managers can and must do. And before I introduce our speaker, Steve Ross, I just wanted to take 30 seconds to tell you a little bit about Risk Masters International. We are a boutique consulting firm that specializes in several risk management disciplines, including business continuity management, IT disaster recovery, crisis management, and cyber risk management. We are unique in the marketplace in that all of our consultants have at least 25 years of relevant business and technical experience in their respective disciplines. And we have no junior staff. And that's why we like to say experience matters. And that's the experience that makes the difference. Our presenter today is Mr. Stephen Ross, Executive Principal of Risk Masters International. Steve is a specialist in business continuity management, crisis management, and IT disaster recovery planning. He holds a Master of Business Continuity Professional certification and is an Associate Fellow of the Business Continuity Institute. And during his career, Steve has implemented business continuity management programs, disaster recovery plans, resilience preparations for numerous banks, government agencies, and industrial corporations. And prior to founding Risk Masters, Steve served as the global leader of the Deloitte & Touche business continuity management practice. That's where we first met. And in recent years, Steve has focused his attention on the resilience and recoverability of large business and technology environments to address client concerns about cybersecurity, including the design and resilience of data centers to enable restoration from cyber attacks. Steve is also an editor of the multi-volume series E-Commerce Security and author of several books in the series, including E-Commerce Security Business Continuity Planning. His most recent book, Creating the Culture of Security, was published in 2011. As Don mentioned, as we get into today's presentation, if you have any questions, please type them into the questions panel on your Zoom desktop. We will be leaving some time at the end of today's presentation by Steve to respond to your questions individually. So without further delay, it's my pleasure to introduce Steve Ross.
Thank you, Eric. You know, it's pretty hard to turn on the television or pick up a newspaper, if anybody picks up newspapers anymore, without reading about cyber attacks, ransomware, data loss, hackers. You read about everything these days. And, you know, there's one point of view that this is really an IT problem. And it is an IT problem, but it's also everybody's problem. You know, what do we get from these cyber attacks? Data loss, downtime, privacy breaches if it's personal information, financial impacts, reputational impacts, systems that we can't trust, poor customer service, lost sales. Business continuity managers, isn't that what you deal with all the time? Isn't this your ballpark? Well, that's why we think that business continuity managers have a real role to play. And we're gonna spend most of our time in the next hour or so talking about what that role is and how you can play it. But I think it's a good idea to start first with just talking about what the business impact is, or how a cyber attack looks from the business perspective. So in the beginning, an attack of some sort occurs. One of three things will happen. Either you don't experience any attack because it's a delay and it's going to happen some period in the future, or the attack occurs and it continues over the long term, mostly bleeding data out of your system. Or of course, it could be an immediate effect that the systems go down. So at that point, you've noted that there's an attack underway. Well, it's either going to be after the fact, the delayed or continuing effect. And now there's some reactions that have to be made. Do you close the systems that are affected, or do you continue to let them run so you continue the business while you continue to bleed data? Or it could be an immediate attack, like a ransomware attack or a distributed denial of service. Different reactions now. Do you pay the ransom? Do you say, no, we're not going to pay, we're going to recover ourselves? These decisions are business continuity decisions ultimately. And I would ask, who decides? Who is it that's going to make that decision? I don't want to wait till the day that we know we're under attack to figure out who's going to be the person. How much is it going to cost if we have downtime? How much is it going to cost in disruption to the business? If we don't know these factors in advance, how are we going to make those decisions? Meanwhile, things are going on. Some of your operations, maybe all of your operations, are disrupted. There's customers not being served, there's sales not being sales not being recorded, sales lost. And afterwards, you're left with a mess. You've got to clear a backlog. You've got systems you don't trust. Customers are angry with you, so you're going to make efforts to keep them and appease them. But again, some questions. You say you had an RTO. Well, that's not relevant because the time it took to recover was much longer than the RTO. You may not possibly get back to your RPO. You may not. You may want to have 1 hour RPO, but you may not have data before last night. And unfortunately, what's possible overrides what you want. The RTO and the RPO are expectations, but that's not the same thing as capabilities. So what we know is we're going to have some kind of disruption. Now, right now, the most disruptive of all is ransomware. And it is possible to recover if you have sufficient backups, but that's going to take a lot of time. Take a look at some of the figures. And I'm not going to read this yellow box to you. You can either read it as I speak, or you'll get it tomorrow when Don sends you the link. But there are some things that I think you ought to pay attention to. There's a 19-day downtime, 19-day on average. And the average cost is nearly $250,000 in ransom. It's really a difficult question to answer as to how much loss you're going to take, but it's going to be pretty high. Now, if it wasn't a ransomware that shut your systems down, or at least made your data unusable, you may be the second most common, or actually the most common form of cyber attack is data theft, particularly personal information or privacy breaches, which also disrupts operations no matter what decisions you make about keeping systems up or not. You've got your IT people all focused on fixing the problem, stopping the bleeding, stopping the data from going out. You may, if it is personal information, have to deal with law enforcement. And in most states in the United States and all provinces in Canada, you have to be in touch with the regulatory authorities to tell them that you had a breach. And at the very least, you've got management that's running around trying to figure out what's going on, trying to keep the ship running, and they're distracted from the basic mission of the company. So, IT really does have a great framework for determining what they're supposed to do. This is from the National Institute of Standards and Technology, or NIST, and it's called the NIST Cybersecurity Framework, or the actual name is, as it says here, the Framework for Improving Critical Infrastructure Cybersecurity. And it's got 5 domains. First, you need to identify the risk to the organization. And I think most companies today are pretty well aware that cybersecurity is an issue and cyber threats are real. You then have to build protection to keep it from happening, monitor to detect when an attack is underway, respond at that time, and recover while it's over, when it's over. So that's what IT is supposed to be doing. Well, let's take a little look based on some really good research, which I'll point to in a moment. How's IT doing? Well, there's good news. According to the annual Verizon Data Breach Investigations Report over a 6-year period, you can see that we've basically cut the number of incidents, attempted attacks, in half. Still, a considerably high number, but we're moving in the right direction. That's the good news. Unfortunately, we also have some bad news. The actual data breaches, those attacks that were successful, have been consistently high for the past 6 years, ranging in the 2,000 number, except in the last report in 2020, the numbers almost doubled up to close to 4,000. So for some reason, we're not capturing the bad guys. The bad guys are still getting through and doing a lot of harm. What you might want to see, though, is some even worse news. If you look at this chart, again, over a 6-year period, it is pretty consistent year to year that, first of all, nearly 6 to 7 months, between 6 and 7 months, is the amount of time that it takes for companies even to realize that they're under attack. We call the mean time to identification. You probably read about the SolarWinds third-party attack that affected most government agencies and U.S. federal government agencies and a considerable number of private sector companies. It was running for 6 months, just as predicted in this model, before anybody realized it. And then it wasn't the companies that were being affected, it was FireEye, who was also attacked. FireEye is a company that provides cybersecurity services. And they suddenly realized that SolarWinds, which is a software product that's used almost everywhere, was causing terrible damage to the integrity of data in systems across the country. And then, certainly relevant to business continuity managers, the mean time to containment is now at its highest recent level at nearly 2.5 months, 73 days. Well, what do we mean by containment? That means we found the problem, but now we don't know where in the software the bug is or the malware is, so we've got to go through all our software, find it, close it down, get rid of it, recover all the data that was affected, recover the software that was affected, and return to normal operations. That may sound an awful lot like business continuity, and it's 2.5 months. So when I say to you that the RTO is, it's a nice expectation, but it's not a possibility, this is where we're seeing the actual reality. And we're going to show more about that later on. So let's look at it now sort of as a report card. Identify is better, but not good. And protection, detection, response, and recovery are all terrible. Terrible. I don't know about you, but if I came home when I was a schoolboy with a report card like that, let's just say the repercussions would not have been good for my social life. So it is, as with so many other things, you say, keep doing it as long as it works, and when it stops working, do something else. Well, it's not working, so it's time to do something else. And the question, of course, is what else? What should we be doing? That's where we're going to spend the bulk of our time, talking about what can be done, and particularly what business continuity managers can do, can and must. But it falls really into two categories of proactivity and resilience. And I give here the dictionary definitions of each of those words: acting in anticipation and recovering quickly. For our purposes this afternoon, I think when I say resilience, you should be thinking about essentially two things: minimize the impact and reduce the likelihood. Again, this is not a new point of view for business continuity managers. This is what we do all the time. So it's an IT problem, but it's a general business problem. Where do business continuity managers come in? What can you do? Well, first of all, you got to learn to make everything cyber resilient. You know what? I'll settle. Make it more cyber resilient. We can at least get that accomplished in the next year or so. We are so far ahead of the game that we'll be perfectly happy to say there's still some risk, because we're never going to get rid of this risk. We only can manage it. So business continuity managers, people who are on this webinar today. Yeah, it's a technical problem. I don't diminish that, and I've got a technical background, so I can understand what's going on, but I don't have to be, and you don't have to be a technician in order to have an important role. Think about it. You've been dealing for years with fires and floods and accidents and smoke damage, all those things. You're not a civil engineer. I don't think many of you are civil engineers, perhaps a few. You can still be effective in your role without having that deep technical background. Where you are contributors in your organization is you understand, probably better than anybody, what the impacts of downtime on the organization are. With that level of understanding and the ability to communicate it, business continuity managers really should be advisors to executive management and driving the discussion. Unfortunately, in my observations of the industry, I don't see many business continuity managers in that role. And now I'm going to try to provide some kind of, let's say, guidance or ammunition for you to be able to take a stronger role. What can you do? Well, I'm just going to go through this list because I'm going to deal with each one of these separately. But first of all, you've got to be a part of the conversation. And then when you're a part of the conversation, you need to change it. And I'll explain why and where in a moment. You need to increase your own technical understanding just so that when you raise the question, you'll understand the answers. Develop some metrics so that you can see how things are moving. Be an evangelist for cyber resilience. Get out and force the market. When I say force the market, I'm talking about the market for products and services that deal specifically with cyber resilience and cyber recovery, which is not very strong today because we business continuity managers, I guess, haven't banged the can loud enough. And then finally, in the role of advisors to management, we need to insist that certain things are in place to reduce both response time, so from the time it happens to the time we recognize it, which is right now 6.5 to 7 months, and recovery time. Once we found it, getting back up much more quickly than we are. So let's take each one of these separately. First of all, I'm looking for business continuity to be a part of the conversation around cybersecurity. So far, what I've seen in all the literature and clients that I've worked with in newspapers, the overwhelming interest in cybersecurity has been regarding data theft, data loss, theft of personal information. And, personal information raises a whole issue of privacy, which is important, but we're not going to deal with this afternoon. But, when there's data loss, yes, there's a lot of time and effort for detection, escalating the problem. You need to notify the data subjects if it is personal information. And in many cases, both with personal information and corporate information, or business to business, you need to find some way to make your customers or your employees or whoever you're keeping records about, making them whole again, redress. And of course, there's business disruption. There's probably going to be legal expense. There may be regulatory fines. But we need to get them to think much more about the impact of downtime caused by cyber attacks. Not only the ones that bring the system down, like ransomware, but even the data theft, what it does to the business itself. So when we talk about downtime, you've got all that overlap of business disruption and the legal and the regulatory that I just talked about, but also the kinds of things that we as business continuity managers have been dealing with from day one. You're going to lose revenue, you're going to lose customers, you're going to lose sales, it's going to hurt your reputation, management is going to take their eye off the ball. How much of this sounds like fires, floods, and pandemics? It's the same point. This is something that we are, as a community, are and should be serious players. And we need to get into that conversation and change it in the direction of downtime so that that gets equal and perhaps higher attention, just as shown in this Venn diagram. Then you need to increase your technical understanding. Now, I'm not saying that you need to become a technician. That's not in the cards, and it's not necessary. But if you're going to be in the conversation, then you need to understand what's going on in that conversation, the terminology that's used, and the ability to understand what IT management is telling you when they give you an answer. Now, you don't have to be an auto mechanic to drive a car. You want to be at the point where you know how to drive in the conversation without being the one who has the deep, detailed responsibility for either addressing it or fixing it. But you need to be able to just talk the talk. And if you really don't, well then, go take a class. Read a book. I just, within a very quick look at Amazon, found 3 books that I put the covers off here. Don't give any endorsement of any one of them, but usually the Dummy series makes things pretty understandable. If you need to, put a specialist on your staff, an IT specialist. Or if you say, I don't really need a full-time IT specialist, then get a consultant. Bring somebody in who on a part-time basis will take part or take your part. And you're not alone in the organization as non-technical specialists who have an interest in business continuity following a cyber attack. Internal audit's worried about that, risk management's worried about that, the privacy people are worried about that because of the loss of PII. Start working with them, talk to them. You'll form a united front. That's going to be a much more effective way of dealing with management than trying to fight this battle alone. You need to have some basic metrics. to be able to discuss the cyber threat realistically. You know, first of all, the obvious question, how much business loss are we going to absorb? That's a given. Now, it just so happens that everybody in this group has a business impact analysis somewhere. And that's great. You've done a business impact analysis. You have an idea of what the cost of downtime is. What you now would want to do is focus that. What's the impact of one particular contingency, a single threat of system downtime? And what we do know is that this is not a linear cost. It increases at some geometric manner over time. So that we can now then say, look, consider all of the costs. We're going to need forensic people. We're going to need investigators just to bring in the problem, to contain it. We'll probably need to get some kind of assessment services or audit services. There's a cost to communicating with the executives and the boards. We bring in outside firms to help clean up the mess. We need to pay them. You may have to reduce cost of products and give discounts to customers to make them whole again. That comes off your bottom line. Pay fines, impact on reputation. All of this is stuff that we deal with on a routine basis, but now put it in the framework of cyber threats, cybersecurity. And if you have those facts and figures at your fingertips, you're going to be a much more effective participant in that conversation. I also want you to be an evangelist for cyber resilience. And there's certain things that you can do that will make you more effective right away. For one thing, there are certain people in every organization are ones who are the real decision makers. Certainly in IT, but not only in IT. The CFO, obviously the CEO, the COO, all those C people. Well, there's a publication, which I suspect many of you have already seen. It's the NIST Guide for Cybersecurity Event Recovery. Everybody in IT management ought to have a copy. You just get it, it's free after all, send it to them. I'll be honest, I've read it. I come away saying, this may be good for IT people. It's pretty basic for business continuity people. Essentially, this document, if you can condense it into one sentence, it says, you need to have a plan, which I agree with, of course. And if you can get that message across to IT management and others in management, that's a great thing. And then, you can reinforce the message. Organize a symposium, organize a training class on cyber resilience, specifically for management. If you don't want to do it yourself, there's outside organizations, hello, Risk Masters, who have that courseware available. When some big cyber attacks occur that result in extensive downtime, send the headlines along, send the news articles along. I'm sure everybody heard about Colonial Pipeline. Did they draw the lessons from what happened to Colonial Pipeline for your organization? When you have tests, start doing tests of events or scenarios that create downtime that are longer than RTO and RPO. See how that works when you do a test. And then finally, just arrange a meeting with the CIO or the CISO or both and explain what your concerns are. They're really on your side. It's just that they've got so many competing demands. Your voice has to be heard. Finally, this publication is general and aimed at government agencies. If you're not a government agency, then tailor the guide to your own organization. Make it specific to your needs and your systems and your data. We talked before about forcing the market, and I said I would come back to it. Look, there is a burgeoning market for cybersecurity products and services. This graph here, or this pie chart, is from an organization called Cybersecurity Ventures, who they monitor the marketplace. And as you see, the two biggest chunks are for prevention, or protection, another way of saying it, and for services. There is nothing. There are no cyber recovery products in the top 100. And it's time that there will be. It's time that business continuity management and our community as a whole starts putting pressure on the software and hardware vendors to develop tools and techniques that we can use. Now, I'll tell you one thing. You're not going to get their attention unless you've got money in your pocket and you're willing to spend it. And that means budget. Now, that may mean budget in your annual request. It may mean budget in IT's annual request. So again, getting to be part of the conversation. But it's got to be out there, and nobody is better positioned to explain to the vendor community what we need than we ourselves, the business continuity managers of North America. There are things that IT can do, that you can advocate for, that don't require huge technology knowledge. One is very simple, and it deals with the fact that we're simply waiting too long to recognize that we're under attack. I'll recommend one thing you can do. You can go home and start doing it this afternoon. And that is to change the culture, change the mentality of the way we deal with computer interruptions, with downtime. Systems go down all the time. You know it, I know it, IT knows it. They do what they can to keep it as short as possible, but it happens. And the way they're treated, always have been, is that there's a bug or any other kind of downtime, we say, oh, somebody must have made a mistake. It was a programmer error. It was some problem with the data. Some user did something wrong. Nobody says, oh, it's a cyber attack. What I then only, once you've exhausted all the other possibilities, you say, oh, we must be under attack. My recommendation is all downtime, henceforth and hereafter, be treated immediately as a sign that you're under attack until such time as you can prove that it wasn't an attack. Look, we're not going to find cyber flaws, cyber attacks, the hidden, or what they call advanced persistent threats, the ones that last for months, unless we go looking for them. And you say, well, that's going to make more work for IT. No, it's not. It really isn't. They're going to be doing the same things that they did. The people in operations, the people in systems administration are going to have to find the bug and fix it. But if they go in with the anticipation that we may be under attack, they're going to find what's going wrong much sooner and be more attuned to finding an attack when it's going on. There's things we need to do that probably aren't in your budget, but you can encourage IT to do it. They're going to reduce recovery time, that 2.5 months. For one thing, we need to keep backups. Lots and lots and lots of backups. If we know that the mean time, the average time to discovery that we're under attack is 207 days, that means some are shorter, but some are longer. We need to have at least 207 generations of backups, not just yesterday and the day before and the day before that, but going back 6 months, 7 months, a year. Then we need to have the people to deal with the problem, what I call a cyber CERT. Now, you may have in your organization a CERT, a computer emergency response team. But usually they come into being at the moment that you realize you're under attack. I'm talking about something different. I'm talking about some group that's going to be proactive, that drills recoveries daily, weekly, whatever it takes, but over and over and over again, making sure they can do it as fast as possible. And then one of the byproducts of that is going to be validating that your critical software and data are in fact uninfected. So that if I know, for example, that an SAP bolt-on has not got any illegal software in it or any bugs or malware in it, and I did that on Monday, and then we get attacked on Wednesday, I don't have to go back 207 days. I only go back to Monday to be able to recover. Keep in mind that the most significant constraint on the speed with which you can recover is the number of people that are available to do the recovery. And the more people you've got, the faster it's going to be. Now, all of these things, yeah, just like I show here, this is going to cost money. Yeah, you know what? Recoverability has always cost money. It always involves redundancy, having second copies of things, even if you don't need them. So this is just more of the same. Now, there are some things that I think business continuity managers must do. And basically what I'm saying is business continuity managers must just basically do their jobs. You can't say, oh, it's an IT problem, I don't know how to deal with that. It's an outage. It's an outage in this case caused by a cyber attack, but it's an outage all the same. We've got to conclude this threat, just like all the others, fires, floods, hurricanes, tornadoes, etc. Now add cyber threats into your planning and into your testing responsibilities. As we've known for years, that's why we do business impact analyses. The causation is less important to the organization than the impact. So really the question is, how much downtime can you absorb? And then what are you going to do when it goes beyond that? So it's not, for business continuity managers, it's not about prevention, detection, or even recovery. That's not where you work. That's where IT works. Our job is to say, how is the organization going to continue doing business in the meantime while the IT people are bringing the systems back? And again, I have a list of recommendations. First of all, we've got to find out exactly what we're dealing with. How long does it take for IT to recover? Then, how are the risk management decisions going to be made when confronted with some kind of disruption? Who else needs to be called in? What do you need to do in planning? Just plain old business continuity planning. And then, as it says, test, test, test. Let's look at each of these individually. First of all, there's a simple question that if you phrase it to your CIO, may cause a lot of head scratching. How long would it take to recover your critical systems? Or you may extend that to say recover all our systems. But let's just leave it with critical systems. Can they calculate that? Have they ever tried doing it? Well, I tell you what, I'm going to give you a little present here, something you can share with your IT folks. This is having done this for clients. These are some of the factors that they should be considering. I don't expect you necessarily to understand what all of these are. If I talk to you about virtual servers and compression ratios, not necessarily your thing, but some of these are. Some of these, how many applications and how many of them are critical, that's stuff that you already know. Once they've figured out how long it would take, then some other questions come in. Can it be done remotely? Are people going to be able to work at home, or they're going to have to come into the data center? Notice I didn't say the hot site. I'm talking about the data center because there's no purpose to going somewhere else. You have to recover the systems where they are. And can third parties play a role here? If you're moving things into the cloud, can the cloud service providers take care of that? can the people who are helping manage your systems, in particularly managing security, can they play a part? And one thing you want to understand is that if you just call them out of the blue and say, "Hi, I'm Joe Blow from XYZ Corporation, and we've had a cyber attack. Can you help us?" You're not going to get a lot. You need to engage these different organizations in advance so that at the time you need them, they're going to be there for you. I asked the question before, who decides? So I want to come back to that. This decision-making process has to be thought through, and it needs to be thought through now before you get hit with an attack. This is not something new. You know that the worst time to figure out what to do is while the building is burning down. Well, in this case, it's not a burning building, it's a system that's down and down for a long time. You got to have some thinking about that. If it's data theft, what's the company's approach? Do you close down the systems? And it's understandable, you know, you close down the systems and the networks because they are no longer trustworthy. We know they're pouring out data. We don't know what else the bugs are doing or the malware is doing. Or do we close down just those systems that we know have been affected? And then the question, of course, is how do you know which ones have been affected and which ones not? So then it becomes, do we close down all systems and networks and validate that they're clean and bring them up one at a time thereafter? I don't have an answer. I don't even want to have an answer. I want the organization to think this question through now so that it doesn't have to be figured out then. And if it's a ransomware attack, do you pay? Now, this is on the surface an easy question. The FBI, the Secret Service, they all say, no, you don't pay. You should never pay. It only encourages them. And remember, these are criminals. Can you really trust them to give you your data back? Okay, maybe. Or do you refuse and pay to recover? Can you afford the time? Can you afford the expense? I'll give you an example, which puts it in great relief. City of Atlanta, a couple of years ago, suffered a ransomware attack. The criminals wanted $51,000. Atlanta said, no, we'll restore ourselves. They did. Took them 2 weeks or more, and it cost $17 million. Should they have paid? Now, I don't have a dog in this fight, but this should be thought out now. And in particular, determining now who's got the authority to make it. Is it the CIO? If the CIO winds up making business decisions, is it the CFO or the COO? I don't care. It could be a committee. Whatever it is, that should be documented. And then the last part of it has to be considered too. Who makes the decision that the systems are now clean and ready to be restored? That's a very important decision and not at all clear who has the ability to make it. There's other people that you would want to rely on and reach out to, depending on what happened and who was involved and what data was involved. Who are you going to call? Oh, whoa. No, I didn't mean that one. I meant this one. You're going to call law enforcement. You may need the FBI if you've got national security information, Secret Service, certainly the local police. If there's personal information and you're doing business in Europe, then you're going to need to deal with the Information Commissioner's Office, or the ICO. And in the United States and in most of Canada, it's the state or provincial authorities. You will probably want help from some of the big cyber recovery vendors. The two best known are FireEye and CrowdStrike. There's plenty of others. I'm not plumping for them, but they are well known, and you can use them or somebody else. You'll probably want some kind of forensics. So at the very least, you're going to need e-discovery because somebody's going to sue you. and expert witnesses that can help you in making your case, you should be considering cyber insurance. So you may have to call your insurance company and make a claim. It may not be there. You may just want to be able to file under business interruption if that's allowed, which it may not be. The point is, you should know who to call. This should be documented, easy to find, and it's really a pretty good idea to establish these relationships now. Don't wait till the incident. Get in touch with the local police. Get in touch with FireEye or CrowdStrike or Kaspersky or whichever one you want to deal with. All of these people should be in your little black book right now. You got to plan for business continuity, even if it doesn't fit neatly into the model of what you wanted and the outage is extended. Look, the criminals, the bad guys, they really, really don't care about your RTOs. They don't care about your RPOs. They haven't read your plan and they really don't care. But we know this. Recovery usually takes longer than anybody wanted it to. Now, I know nothing about Colonial Pipeline. I don't know the people there. I've never consulted there. But I did do something this week, which is look up, do they have a business continuity manager? And yes, they do. And I am willing to wager, without knowledge, that that business continuity manager did a business impact analysis. And I'm willing to wager that there were some business functions that said, we can't be down for, let's make it easy, longer than a day. I'm sure each of you have a lot of business activities that have an RTO of a day. If they were down for a week, I don't care what the RTO was. They were down for a week. The business has to be challenged. And we have to start thinking it through. Where would we get information if we didn't have our systems? Well, there's certain places you could go. There are intermediaries, EDI exchanges, internet service providers, the stock exchange, if you come to that. And you might have to go to a customer and say, look, I know you frequently order from us and our systems are crushed. You've probably read about it in the papers. What did you order from us on Monday? Because our systems went down on Tuesday morning. We want to fulfill your orders. Could you tell us again? How are you going to take care of the absolute must priority activities without systems? Again, Colonial Pipeline. After a day or two, what they did was they sent human beings out to the critical choke points in their pipeline and manually opened valves and closed valves. Well, that's what they had to do. Once the systems are recovered, how are you going to clear the backlog? And how is the organization going to absorb all the impacts, in particular, customer-facing impacts? And to that extent, the financial impact, although that's where insurance comes in. Finally, and I'll then stop for questions, you do testing. Yeah, that's part of your job. Well, now we've got something else that we have to test. Downtime that extends well beyond what we expected. Well, this is a great topic for a tabletop test. No risk, those systems are going to go down, but you get to think through all the issues I just raised. Now, it is possible to simulate them. It is possible to do it, but it's going to require a long time, both in the planning, so you don't clobber systems, and in the execution, because you can't just say, we'll pretend we have downtime for an hour. No, that's not the point. You're going to try to restore systems. It could take days. Let's see what happens. I think it's one of the things that you may want to consider is not to try to just simulate a technical problem like a cyber attack, but to coordinate that with IT's own cyber recovery testing and see how that works. But I'll tell you, even if you do that, even if you do a tabletop, you can recreate what it looks like, but you can't recreate what it feels like. Going through an attack, I've had clients where I was there when it happened. You know, there's an awful lot of people pulling their hair out. Just leave it at that. Furthermore, there's a, you know, you can say, well, we'll take a couple of applications and we'll practice with those. That's great. I'm not saying you shouldn't do it, but there's a huge difference between practicing recovery from the downtime of some applications and the business functions that rely on them, and the recovery of all of them, which may be the circumstances when you get attacked. It just doesn't, it doesn't scale linearly. It doesn't just, you know, go up in a straight line. You've got people who are doing multiple assignments. They can't be in two places at once. You know, they're hardworking people, IT techs, but they have to sleep and they have to eat. You know, there are realities that have to intrude. So I'll close by saying that business continuity management is in touch with almost all the players, from IT through risk management, audit, insurance, finance, privacy people. It's not that you're necessarily a central player, but you're in the middle, or you should be in the middle, so that you are a part of the action in developing a cyber resilience for your organization. And with that, Eric, tell me, I have not been able to look at the control panel, but did we get some questions?
Yeah, we have a few questions here. Let me just pick up the first one. Here's somebody who has asked, how do you overcome the tendency of most organizations that IT owns a cyber incident? In reality, IT is the genesis of the incident, and the impact is likely on business units. Yet we see too often that IT is the crisis manager rather than the impacted business units.
You know, I will deal with that by analogy. I don't accept the idea that IT is the genesis of cyber incidents. They're the ones. If you remember that Larson cartoon of the deer with the birthmark that looks like a bullseye, that's who they are. But when there's a flood, when there's a fire in the building, does facilities own the problem? No, they own fixing the building, and IT owns fixing the systems. But the business functions, as guided by business continuity management, owns the problem, the business problem. And I think this is just another flavor of an incident that can bring a company down. So I would push back on the idea that this is IT's problem. It's only their problem to fix it.
Okay.
And prevent it, of course.
Yeah. Second question. Do you see cyber security becoming an adjunct skill set for business continuity managers, or is it just a specialty that they can focus on in addition to their core set of skills?
Well, I don't see it as a separate and distinct skill. As I said, for a business continuity purpose, it's just another source of downtime. But I do see that with business functions being so heavily automated and so much of what we do reliant on our information systems, that business continuity managers need to be able to be a part of that just as much as they are with facilities, just as much as they are with building security, physical security, and other subspecialties. I think both the strength and the weakness of our field is that we are jacks of many trades, and we're not expected to be master of any of them. But we can exert an awful lot of mastery where we know that the greatest problems are, And I would submit that we're having more cyber attacks than we are having fires these days.
Yeah, that is definitely true. And maybe part of the role we play is as a facilitator of process, the strategic and tactical planning that goes along with what business continuity managers do on a daily basis. Okay. Another question here. It says, the recent attack on Colonial Pipeline raises the issue of responding to ransomware. How do you think companies should respond to such attacks? And should they pay the ransom or just focus on data recovery? Very timely.
Well, I don't think that's a fair question, in the sense that you need to do both. You need to consider whether you should pay the ransom. And even if you don't, you should be looking at data recovery. I think Colonial Pipeline specifically brings up that point. Colonial paid it. The newspapers say they paid $5 million. I don't know if that's true, but a lot of money. And then when they got the decryption key, they found that the process of decrypting all of their data was so slow that they were better off just recovering the data from scratch, and they went back and did that in parallel. So they were doing both. I'm of two minds as to whether you pay the bad guys. It doesn't sit well in my craw. I don't like paying off, kidnappers and thieves. On the other hand, if somebody bangs into your car, do you always put a claim in against your insurance? Yeah, maybe you do, maybe you don't. Maybe you just absorb it. I don't think I can answer that question. I think each individual organization has to come to its own conclusion and probably put some limits around it. If the ransom is $10,000 and you're down for days, pay the $10,000. If it's 10 million, we'll think about it. So I think it's a matter of making the decision and then setting the parameters for that decision.
Now, you mentioned insurance, which kind of leads into this next question that we have. AXA recently announced that it will no longer pay ransomware demands under its cybersecurity policies. I believe this was in France, not necessarily internationally. How does this affect the priorities of a business continuity manager?
Well, I suppose it affects the risk manager more than the business continuity manager. But if we've taken pay the ransom off the table, then you'd better answer that question that I raised before. Does IT know how long it takes to restore your systems? If you had to start from scratch, from what they call a bare metal restore, which I don't have to explain to give you the impression that you're starting from dead zero. How long would it take? How many people, how many hours? And do you have enough, if you say, I can have 5 people working for 24 hours, that's great, but they're going to get halfway through it. And at that point, somebody's got to go to sleep. You'd better really have a hard answer to that question, because now it's become a pure risk management factor beyond business continuity.
Okay. We're running up against our time frame, so I think we have time for one more question.
Sure, go ahead. In that case, I will do that. Say, let's continue this conversation. If we can be of help, Eric or I, to you, get in touch. If you just want to put your point of view out, get in touch. If you want to argue, get in touch.
Okay. Well, here's the last question we'll go for, and then we'll turn it back to Don. Considering the current threat, what scenarios should business continuity managers focus on to address effective recovery from cyber attacks?
What do you say that again? What scenario?
Yeah. Are there certain scenarios that are more common? Scenarios involving phishing attacks, advanced persistent threats, those kinds of. scenarios.
know now that fish seem to be and particularly spearfish, seem to be the primary entry point for a lot of these attackers. But now that we've seen what happened with SolarWinds, didn't involve anything other than getting to a vendor. I don't know which scenario is the most important from the causation aspect. I would focus more on the effect, and the effect that most of us are worried about is the inability to use your systems. So in other words, ransomware.
Yeah, and one of the things I'll just add to that, because I know I was the victim of this way back when. You remember several years ago when Target was hit through an advanced persistent threat, and they for several months had left a user ID and password open and didn't shut it down. That was originally issued to a vendor, I believe, and eventually somebody used that as the access point to get in and took a bunch of credit card information. So I got a call one morning for that, and that could have been addressed really just through a simple procedure of looking at which IDs are no longer active, or when somebody leaves the company, shutting down and deactivating an ID could have prevented that. But there's several scenarios, I guess, that would be appropriate to look at from a business continuity perspective. Anyway, Steve, thank you very much.
I want to thank everybody who's attended. It's been great.
Okay, I'm going to send it back to Don.
Okay, hey, thanks, Steve, Eric. Great presentation, some great topics that I'm sure will stir some debate amongst our listeners today, but I want to thank you for that presentation. And I just want to remind everybody else that if you have any questions that we didn't get to today, you can reach out to Steve or Eric at the email address that's currently shown on the screen. And as I mentioned earlier when we started the broadcast, I will be posting a copy of this webinar on the Continuity Insights website in a couple of days if you missed any part of the broadcast, or if you'd like to share it with your colleagues. And also, a number of you have requested a copy of Steve's slides from his presentation today, and I'll be sure that each of you gets a copy of that. I'll be sending that out tomorrow, along with the link to the on-demand copy of the webinar. So, thank you again, Steve, Eric, and thank you to everyone for attending today's webinar, Cyber Resilience, what business continuity managers can and must do. On behalf of Continuity Insights and our corporate sponsor, Risk Masters International, we hope you enjoyed today's presentation, and thank you, and enjoy the rest of your day.